Just a test. No, you talk.
Okay.
Test your sound.
Hello. We're testing again and handling the situation of stress and the problems that mankind has all over the world, and how that the faith in God and Christ and the church and the faith-based organizations in America and around the world can help you feel better and live better and be more healthy and accomplish more in life, you see.
Perfect.
So,
testing sound. Okay, the next thing we want to talk about is there is a critical set of ideas and issues which are involved in all of the problems that we've been talking about. And most of the problems that we have in our country and in the world are tied into this one critical issue. And so we're going to examine it from a psychological perspective by reading what some of the experts have to say about it. And it's going to be, this is critical to the faith-based initiative and the school voucher initiative, and in fact, any initiative that's in Washington right now, and that is, how do we really get at the truth and the facts of the situation, of these situations. So the first thing I want to read from is from Telling the Truth by Lynn Cheney. And here's what she has, what her observations are on the issue. She says, as George Orwell showed in 1984, in a world where objective truth is denied, definitions become exceedingly slippery, and anything can mean almost anything else. So much that follows from denying the idea of truth is deeply unsettling. We have to worry not only about whether our educational and cultural institutions will pass along an accurate and balanced history to our children, but also about whether they will communicate to them the importance of reason or trying to overcome bias, of using evidence to arrive at conclusions, understandings that they will have to have if they are ever able to judge what they are told.
she's right on the beam.
Yeah, she's right on the beam.
1982.
Yeah.
20 years ago.
Well, 1984 is the book by George Orwell, and let's see, when did she write this book? 1995, almost 10 years ago. So she says, I want you to consider the distortions and divisions being wrought by a kind of thinking that denies there is truth, and to examine how it is that this postmodern approach has become entrenched and powerful. I want to look at the origins of the radical skepticisms of our time, examine its claims to legitimacy, and finally suggest that what we can do to blunt its force and restore truth and reason to a central place in our lives. So it seems like this is a critical issue in Washington and across the world, because many of our problems are resulting from not understanding the true underlying causes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
So I've found this is an especially critical problem because in all of this material that I've been reading, this material is not getting out into the public discourse.
That's right. That's right.
Because of this problem of tuning out certain ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to be looking further into that. Okay, now here's another passage in her book in which she talks about an incident of violence, mm-hmm. and this will apply this, it'll help us to start to discuss how this problem of the truth, being disconnected from the truth, leads to violence. It says, in late spring 1994, an incident in Philadelphia provided a chilling vision of life without such qualities. 49-year-old Mohammed Jabaripur was working a route in South Philadelphia in a Mr. Softy ice cream truck when a 16-year-old tried to extort money from him. Jabaripur refused to give the 16-year-old what he demanded, and the youth shot Jabaripur. As the father of three lay dying, neighborhood teenagers laughed at him and mocked his agony with a rap song they composed on the spot. They killed Mr. Softy. Another ice cream truck driver and friend of Jabaripur, who came on the scene shortly after the shooting, described what he saw. It wasn't human, he said. When I got there, people were laughing and asking me for ice cream. I was crying. My best friend was killed. They were acting as though a cat had died, not a human being.
Yeah.
So that's an example of a disconnect from reality.
Mm-hmm.
These people who committed the murder, they're disconnected from their own capacity for empathy.
Yeah.
They're disconnected from the reality of their victim.
Right.
So this problem of disconnecting from reality is, I've found that it's discussed in many other problems besides violence. So we're going to be looking at further, how does this happen to people?
What a tragedy.
Yeah, what a tragedy.
Yeah.
So part of our investigation is to investigate and understand what's happening here so that we can understand better how to apply the solution.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Accounting for such behavior is no simple matter. People who behave this way have obviously become desensitized to violence, probably because they have seen so much of it. Columnist Bob Greene suggests that their insensitivity reveals a contemporary confusion of entertainment and reality. Quote, "We have increasingly become a nation of citizens who watch anything and everything as if it were all show," he writes. But however it has come about, people who laugh at a dying man have no sense that a stranger can suffer just as they do, that his death creates sorrow for someone just as would the death of someone close to them. Without the idea that we live in reality with other people who are as real as we are, compassion is impossible, and so is any other virtue one could name. Nothing beyond the gratification of the moment matters in such a world. Not fairness, not justice, not responsibility, not honor. None of them matters because in such a world none of them exists. The pathology involved in the murder of Mohammed Jabaripur and the behavior of the crowd afterwards runs so deep it is clear there is no single explanation for it and no easy remedy. Well, hopefully she's wrong on that.
That's right.
But it is also evident that intellectual elites do no one a favor by sending through society messages that there is no external reality in which we all participate, that there is only the game of the moment, the entertainment of the day. Outside the protective environment of the campus, these ideas have real and devastating effects. The virtues that we have increasingly come to believe we must nurture if we are to be successful as a culture simply make no sense if we turn away from reason and reality.
Mm-hmm.
Thus, whether we as a society find the will to live in truth is more than a matter for idle speculation. The answer may very well determine whether we survive.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Right.
So what I relate that to are two critical ideas that I've learned a lot about. One is called escapism, which Billy Graham talks about, and then the other one is psychic numbing,
Mm-hmm.
which Robert J. Lifton talks about.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll turn to that next. So here's what Billy Graham had to say in 1965 in A World Aflame.
Yep.
Okay. Escapism. Millions are busy burying their heads in the sand, pretending that the devastating events of our times are not really happening. They are desperately trying to escape the realities of the pressures of modern living. Escapism is not in itself a condition of mental sickness, but a subconscious mechanism to escape reality. It is a mode of behavior adopted to evade unpleasant facts and realities. It can take many forms. The harassed housewife goes on a shopping spree, while someone else may take refuge in a clandestine love affair or a Watusi session. One of the most conspicuous modes of escape is alcoholism, which is now a national catastrophe. Each week in our Minneapolis office, we receive thousands of letters, more than half of which have to do with domestic problems, and half of those are related to problems of drinking. Drinking has become one of our most serious social problems. It is basically the result of an attempt to escape from the responsibilities and realities of life. Every time my husband and I have a disagreement, quote, he dashes for the corner bar, writes a woman from Ohio. So this is escapism, but let's also mention right now that some people drink to escape reality, and some people drink to reduce their stress from facing reality.
That's right, yeah.
So, for example...
It cuts both ways.
Yeah, it cuts both ways. So, for example, Ted Turner has been described as drinking some, but he's somebody who faces reality and is looking out in the world at all the bad things that are happening and trying to figure out how to solve problems. So that would give him more stress. So he's facing reality, but then he might drink some to bring his stress down, which a lot of people might be doing. So some people drink for that reason also. So then he says, volumes could be written on the problem of dope addiction. Millions of barbiturates are swallowed every night to help the nation sleep. Millions of tranquilizers keep us calm during the day. Millions of pep pills wake us up in the morning after the hangovers of the night before. The Bible warns that these flights from reality bring no lasting satisfaction. So it seems to me that that's a pretty critical idea, because that's one possible explanation for why so many people are disconnected from the Bible. There's another concept that I'll interject right here, which is that of cognitive dissonance, which is a psychological concept, which means that if we have two ideas in our mind, it creates a lot of internal stress. For example, let's say we're aware of people suffering around us, then we're aware of what the Bible says, which is, blessed are the peacemakers, or bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the laws of Christ. So if we're aware of that philosophy, and we know that that's what we're supposed to do, but we're overloaded on stress ourselves, then our mind would automatically disconnect us from the Bible philosophy, so that we don't have to live with that, that extra stress.
That's right. Yeah.
So that seems to be why people are tuning out reality.
That comes from Billy Graham. Right.
This idea on escapism does, yeah.
Yeah, right, absolutely, yeah, right.
Yeah, he was right on.
That's a great example. Best example we could have.
Yep.
Right, yeah.
Yep. So, here's the next thing he says. Double thinking. How does a society develop the kind of psychosis that plagues us today? It is the product of many things, including the loss of religious faith, faulty education. In his book, 1984, George Orwell describes what he calls doublethink. This is not an original idea, for the Bible says a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. Nationally, we are in a state of double-mindedness that could endanger our very survival. Doublethink, or double-mindedness, means the faculty of holding two contradictory beliefs in one's mind and accepting both of them. Erich Fromm, in his book Will Man Prevail, says, while people believe in God, they are not concerned with God. That is, they do not worry or lose sleep over religious or spiritual problems. Most people of the West say that they believe in God, hence in God's principles of love, justice, truth, and humility. Yet these ideas have little influence on our behavior. Most of us are motivated by the wish for a greater material comfort, security, and prestige. Ideals can easily be turned into shibboleths, mere catchwords. The ideal becomes alienated. It ceases to be an authentic experience and becomes instead an idol, outside of self, to which we pay homage and which we use to cover up dishonesty and immorality. So I would take that as a description of this process of this problem of cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
And it can lead to spiritual alienation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But we'll be discussing that further in our future material.
Okay. You couldn't have any better example than Billy Graham.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, he's been a minister to the world in this generation. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would take it as him as an example of somebody who's highly connected to reality.
Absolutely, yeah. Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And so it seems like the Christian religion and maybe the other religions, because they give people strength, it empowers them to face the hard truths in life.
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah.
Especially
the Christian religion.
Mm-hmm.
Right, yeah. Better than any other religion in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Other religions have good points, but none is... Christianity is superior to every other religion in the world, see.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's got a lot of assets, and we're going to be
That's right, yeah.
just describing all those in our
That's right,
material
yeah.
that we're creating.
That's right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so here he says, when we look for a remedy for a condition that produces an unhealthy national psychosis, we should remember that what was said by Bernard Iddings Bell, quote, all human predicaments are not to be resolved by tinkering with the symptoms, because our disorders are not those of mere housekeeping. It is the whole sewer system that is out of whack. In times of national problems, we should be hearing the voice of God in His effort to have us think. His thoughts after Him. Many times we miss the purpose of national catastrophes. Charles C. West says, we turn to God for help when our foundations are shaking, only to learn it is God who is shaking them. Perhaps out of all this, God is speaking to the nation and to the individual. We are not made for emptiness. We are not made for boredom. We were not created to cringe in fear. Our anxiety, our mental anguish, our concern, all reach upward for purpose and fulfillment. There are signs in the sky. They portend a better life, a better way, a better day. So I think this is critical to the discussion because, first of all, what we're trying to do in this conversation is get beyond tinkering with the symptoms,
Mm-hmm.
which most of our efforts are just tinkering with the symptoms.
Yeah.
Doctors tinker with symptoms.
Yeah.
Let's see. The prisons are just tinkering with the symptoms.
Yeah, right.
The police are trying to intervene in the symptoms, but we're not, in all those efforts, they're not yet getting at the underlying causes,
Mm-hmm.
which is what the Bible attempts to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we'll read that from that next, because it's got some great things to say about going way beyond tinkering with the symptoms.
Right, yeah.
So
that's the reason we have prison ministries. It was
Mhm.
Chuck Colson and others like him, see.
that's a perfect example
That's right,
of
yeah.
going beyond tinkering with the symptoms
Right, yeah.
to get at the heart of the disease.
Right, yeah.
So that's what our work together is, to shine the spotlight and illuminate
uh-huh.
the underlying causes,
Yeah,
looking beyond the symptoms.
that's right, yeah.
So we're looking through all of this material of people who have spent the last 30 to 60 years, in the case of Billy Graham and Robert Schuller, at what are the underlying causes.
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah.
So here's what the Bible says. This is from the book of Proverbs, that's from the Old Testament, right?
No,
Book of Proverbs.
Proverbs in the Old Testament, yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Okay.
Right, yeah.
Chapter 1. The Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, judgment, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and increase learning, and a man of understanding will attain wise counsel. To understand a proverb and an enigma, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction.
Mm-hmm.
Wisdom calls aloud outside. She raises her voice in the open squares. She cries out in the chief concourses. At the openings of the gates in the city she speaks her words. Quote, "How long, you simple ones, will you love simplicity? For scorners delight in their scorning, and fools hate knowledge. Turn at my rebuke. Surely I will pour out my spirit on you. I will make my words known to you. Because I have called and you refused. I have stretched out my hand and no one regarded. Because you disdained all my counsel and would have none of my rebuke. I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when your terror comes. When your terror comes like a storm and your destruction comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you. Quote, then they will call on me, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but they will not find me. Because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord. They would have none of my counsel and despised my every rebuke. Therefore they shall eat the fruit of their own way and be filled to the full with their own fancies." Sounds like life.
Right. See.
"For the turning away of the simple will slay them, and the complacency of fools will destroy them." So what does that mean? The complacency of fools will destroy them.
That's right.
If we're complacent,
yeah, right. Yeah.
we will be destroyed.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because the fools are those who are without God and without the principles of God. See, this was written by the direction of the Holy Spirit by Solomon, and God guided his mind as he wrote those words. You see.
So now the Jewish people sort of carry the Old Testament.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Until the time of Jesus.
That's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right,
so this is what they lived by for all those years.
Right, yeah, right. Yeah. They didn't listen to that very well. You see. Some of them didn't. Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of them did. Some didn't.
Okay.
Those of faith did. See.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess those of us who didn't have this,
that's right,
definitely didn't live by it.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, we didn't even know it existed. So it says, "But whoever listens to me will dwell safely and will be secure without fear of evil."
That's right.
"My son, if you receive my words and treasure my commands within you, so that you incline your ear to wisdom and apply your heart to understanding. Yes, if you cry out for discernment and lift up your voice for understanding, if you seek her as silver and search for her as for hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God."
That's right. See.
So that's what we want to empower in our project, is all of these great doctors have a huge amount of wisdom and understanding. And you do too. And that's why we want to put all that knowledge.
That's the reason I studied that word from Genesis to Revelation, including the Psalms and all the rest, you see. God has led me in the study of that word. See, all truth comes from God, See, all truth comes from God.
That's pretty powerful.
Yes.
Well, that makes sense if you look at that this Bible has been around for 3,000 or 4,000 years. And
long time. Yeah. Since Moses.
There's so much truth and power in here.
That's right, yeah.
You know, I mean, I don't know if God exists myself. I'm not as sure as you are, but
I am.
Look at this
Yeah.
and so much truth there, it makes me wonder.
That's right, yeah. Right, yeah.
About that. It's like evidence that this came from somebody special.
That's right, yeah. See.
Great. So.
See, God and the Holy Spirit guided these 40 writers who wrote this Bible from Genesis to Revelation. 40 different writers. But they were all guided by the same Spirit of God, see. So that what they wrote is harmonized together. So the Bible tells a story of harmony and peace and hope and salvation, see. And it all dovetail together, see. Where in the world would you find 40 different writers who could write a book like the Bible?
Well, you know, I've been reflecting on that exact question over the past couple of years because I read a lot of books, and I've never found a book that has so much truth and value in it.
That's right. That's right.
There's no human books.
No human book.
That
Right,
are even on
this is a divine book.
Par. Yeah. So
this
what
is
you're
a
saying,
divine book, you see.
what you're saying makes sense.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So I'll just read a little bit more here. It says in chapter 3, "My son, do not forget my law, but let your heart keep my commands. For length of days and long life and peace they will add to you."
That's right. Better health. Long days. Better life, yeah. Better health. It all ties together. Makes sense. See?
Yep. So what our project is to show the truth in these words.
Right, yeah.
And
Absolutely, yeah.
bring it all together so that, you know, the pastors and priests, they need to, it'll be useful for them to understand how
and
to
disseminate
apply this.
that word, the truth of that word, that Bible, see,
Yep.
to the people of that congregation in the world, see.
Yeah.
That's what Billy has done, see.
And by increasing the understanding, yeah, that's exactly what he's done.
That's right, yeah. Greater than any other person who has ever lived, probably. See, beside Christ, you see.
Yeah.
And Norman Vincent Peale, too. Bob Schuller. And many others.
Yeah.
See, we were trained in that word. So, the truth that makes you free in every aspect of life. Better health, better understanding, better education, feeling better, no anger, no stress. See? No hatred. Love, peace, joy, faith, faithfulness and mercy and kindness and goodness. Those are the things that make life worthwhile, see.
Yep, that makes sense.
That's right, yeah.
So, let's see. Okay, the next thing we want to talk about, here's an example of how escapism is factoring into some of our national issues. And this is from Censored, from Project Censorship, and it's from the introduction by Hugh Downs. So, he is talking about the issue in the media of reality being tuned out, which is what Lynn Cheney talked about. So, the reason for a growing concern about censorship is because it does exist in both subtle and unsubtle forms. The mildest of these is what I would call deference to public perception. If we report on a mob hit, We feel no hint of restriction on exposing the facts. The public doesn't like gangsters. But if medical science were to discover that apple pie is bad for your health, we'd be inclined to put a spin on the story.
That's right.
Deferring to the fact that the public would resist having such an American icon cast in a bad light.
Uh-huh.
The story would be told with a hint of skepticism or given lower priority than it might deserve.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's just like the leftists have attacked the Boy Scouts, you see.
Mm-hmm.
Right. The Boy Scouts are as American as apple pie. And the Girl Scouts, see,
Mm-hmm.
and the Boys Clubs, and the Girls Clubs, and the YMCA, and the YWCA, see, and the Rotary Clubs, and so on and so. These things, you know, the ungodly people attacking those great institutions, the church, you see, causes all this stress and sin in the world, see. So, it's
Yep. Now that's a good point, and we'll use that for a moment to make a quick turn, because I grabbed the newspaper today, and this is from Friday actually, and there's this new issue coming up in Washington right now, which are that some people are sort of implying that President Bush and his team had warning signs for the problem on September 11th, and they're sort of charging that there was some kind of mismanagement of the issue, and so that's sort of
that's the left-wingers that are charging that, you see.
I believe that.
That's
so
right, yeah.
that's an example of
Misguided people.
Misguided.
They are.
Of I want to discuss for a minute the consequences of that particular issue.
That's right.
Because it's been going on for most of our lives.
Yeah,
I
right.
think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
that
right.
type of a problem, and it's an example of some of the issues that we're talking about. So I take that as an example of interpersonal conflict, and the psychologists call that vilification and scapegoating.
Right, yeah. Right.
And it's motivated by an attempt to get ahead.
That's right,
and to win. You know, when the other side wants to win and they want to, you know, make the world a better place, sometimes they, if they don't live by the truths in the Bible,
that's right,
which is fairness and honesty
and truth,
right, and supporting each other, then when they don't have those scripts to live by, then they go for the negative, stirring up strife. And
here's a president who was brought to Christ many years ago by Billy Graham, see, as I walked the shores of Kennebunkport, Maine, and spent time with Billy talking about God and Christ and the Bible and the truth, see. And he gave up his drinking and changed his life, and that's the kind of man we now have as our president, see. And these misguided left-wingers that are attacking him on all these issues, see, any issue that comes along, it's amazing, see. They will attack them, see.
Yep.
And this team of people, it's a tragedy.
Yep, it's a major tragedy, and in our project, we want to start addressing that particular pattern.
That's right.
Because now I'll tell you a few thoughts I have and observations I have which are not proven yet, but we'll be investigating them further. And this type of way of relating to each other creates seems to be creating a lot of mischief in our country.
That's right, absolutely. Yeah.
Which I'll describe my own personal experience over my lifetime. for many, many years, I was very paranoid about Republicans. I had believed that the Republicans were evil and the Democrats were good. And
you were brainwashed.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's example of brainwashing. So there was this intense fear that I'd live with, and I think that's actually very common.
Oh,
because
yes.
I know a lot of people who they're either on one side or the other.
That's right. Yeah.
They're either pro-Republican and they're super paranoid of the Democrats, or they're Democrats and they're super paranoid of the Republicans.
Yeah.
And some of the surveys we've been seeing over the last 10 years are verifying this, that the majority or a large percentage of Americans don't trust the government.
That's right, yeah.
But I don't think that that's because they're untrustworthy. I think it's because this vilification
That's right.
and stirring up paranoia and strife,
That's right, yeah.
it causes the whole American public, it shapes their views and their fears.
That's right, yeah. I've seen that happen for over 60 years in America, see.
Yep.
That kind of thing, see.
Now, what nobody's ever done, I don't know, maybe somebody's done it in books that we are not aware of, but nobody's ever examined that from a psychological perspective and try to figure out, well, why is that happening? So let's just take a second and look at that, because it's really exciting.
That's right.
I found some interesting possible interpretations for why that's happening. We could all probably agree that the Republicans and Democrats, in large part, not all of them, but they don't get along.
That's right.
Right? They fight.
That's unfortunate, see.
Yeah. Because it's unfortunate because the Bible says, get along.
Get along, right.
Work together.
Work together, right, sir.
One of you is, the arm, and then the other of you is the other arm.
That's right.
And it's of one body.
It's one body. Work in harmony. The whole body, every part of the body works together in harmony.
Yeah. And what's the other one? Let's see. If 3 or 4 of you come together in my name,
that's right, yeah.
the name of Jesus Christ, then you will accomplish great things.
That's right, absolutely, yeah.
So that's the potential
that's right,
in
yeah.
Washington. So
I've known some good, godly, and conservative Democrats. But and I worked with some of them, see. But I've been a Republican for 65 years.
Well, it was you that helped me to understand, because you liked the Republicans and George Bush, and so I knew that you're a person of integrity and honesty and goodness.
Yeah, right, yeah.
So I figured if you like them, then they must be good.
Yeah, they are good.
So I started rethinking my fear and paranoia. So here's a possible explanation for why this animosity and conflict is happening, has been happening for your whole life.
That's because people don't know the truth that makes you free, that comes from the Bible, see. See.
Well, that's the cure.
See, yeah.
That's the cure that we're going to work on implementing.
That's right, yeah, right.
And
yeah.
now here's a possible explanation for the problem. This is from Burnout in Families by Dr. Charles Figley. It's one of the best books that I've found. I've mentioned it before. This is must reading for anybody who's involved in these issues. The editorial board includes Matthew J. Friedman at the National Center for Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder as part of the Veterans Administration. It's got reviewed by doctors at Kent State University, Duke University, Florida State University, University of Florida, University of Pennsylvania.
Good people.
All good people. So this book is about how traumatic experiences break up families and cause them to fight.
Sure, right, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And the other book that we read from before, called Contagious Emotions, is also about that. But here he says, families are composed of members who have ongoing and interdependent relationships with one another and one another's outside family and friends. Viewed as psychosocial systems, we are concerned simultaneously with the family structure and its processes of acquiring and disseminating social supportiveness and other key resources for its members. A psychosocial system, like the family, is a living, changing entity of self-correcting and self-sustaining activities that respond to changing demands.
Right.
So the Republican and Democratic parties or Washington could also be thought of as a family.
Yeah, right. Should be.
Should be, yeah.
Yeah. To do that which is right and good for the American people.
Mm-hmm.
All 280 million of them.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
So what this whole book is about is how traumatic experiences cause people to fight.
Mm-hmm.
So here it says, a traumatic event occurs when a person experiences an event outside the range of usual human experience that would be markedly distressing to almost anyone. A serious threat to one's life or physical integrity, serious threat or harm to one's children, spouse, or other close relatives or friends, sudden destruction of one's home or community, or seeing another person seriously injured or killed in an accident by physical violence. Family burnout is the breakdown of the family members' collective commitment to each other
Mm-hmm.
and a refusal to work together in harmony as a function of some crisis or traumatic event or series of crises or events that leave members emotionally exhausted and disillusioned.
Right. Absolutely, yeah.
So does that kind of describe the Republican Democratic parties?
That's right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's an inability to work together in harmony.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So for a moment we're going to apply this model of understanding to that particular problem.
Because both parties say that they are interested in American freedom, the health of all the people, see, education of all the people, see,
Mm-hmm.
and the ability to work and to make a living and to have all the things that all the people of America need, see. And there are certain principles that can accomplish that, see. So we need to be on the beam and get the truth out that makes you free by both groups and so on, so.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no reason for them to attack each other if they will know the truth that makes you free about every facet of life. Your mental health, your psychological health, your physical health,
Mm-hmm.
your educational ability, your work habits, your profession, everything that you do in life. We should be interested and work together so that that's accomplished.
Perfect. Well, that's
not attacked each other, see.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, that's what we're going to work on.
That's right. Yeah.
Everything you just said
That's
is
right.
perfect. We're going to get that out to the public
That's right. Yeah.
so that we can understand how what you just said
Very
can fit
good.
with solving problems.
That's right. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So let's.
So what we better do
Wait,
now is
wait.
to.
Okay. So what we want to do, what I'd like to do is look at why, possibly a possible explanation for why the people get into relationships in which there's conflict and strife. So the model, the explanation which Dr. Figley talks about and the other authors in his book Burnout and Family is that when people go through traumatic experience together, it creates irritability, which is a symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder. And then because they don't have an understanding of that this is happening, it can create strife.
Right.
And so as I read this material more and more over the past 2 years, and then I studied some of our problems in the country, I saw this possible explanation of how it could all fit together. And it's sort of unusual, an unusual explanation, so there may be a little bit of controversy about it, but I think the fit is so perfect that I want to talk about it so that people can consider that line of thinking.
Okay.
So let me read for a second from the Bible, because there's a powerful passage in Romans 7, starting at number 15, which sort of fits together with the whole discussion.
Mm-hmm.
For that which I do, let me start at 14. For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am carnal, sold under sin. For that which I do, I allow not. For what I would, that do I not. But what I hate, that I do.
Mm.
So they seem to be talking about this people doing what they hate to do, what they don't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
There's something...
Because they're worldly.
Mm-hmm.
Right, yeah.
So they're
not spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
Right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there seems to be something driving people
Mm-hmm.
to do,
Mm-hmm.
or driving us to do sin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now then, it is no more I that do it, but sin that dwelleth in me.
Mm-hmm.
But how to perform that which is good I find not. For the good that I would I do not, but the evil which I would not, that I do.
Mm-hmm.
Now if I do that I would not, it is no more I that do it, but sin that dwelleth in me.
Mm-hmm.
But I see another law in my members, warring against the law of my mind, and bringing me into captivity to the law of sin which is in my members. O wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from the body of this death?
Mm-hmm. That's what Paul said in Romans.
Yep.
Right, yeah. Mm-hmm. Right,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems to capture that problem of something drives us
Mm-hmm.
to commit sinful acts
That's right, yeah.
and hurt each other.
That's right, yeah. Mm-hmm. Right, yeah.
So the explanation of the understanding it from traumatic experiences and from stress is that the stress of sin creates these symptoms which are sins in themselves, like
Mm-hmm.
anger.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So now I'm turning to the National Center for Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder, a great organization, and here's what they say. Effects of traumatic experiences. Sometimes, when they find themselves suddenly in danger, people are overcome with feelings of fear, helplessness, or horror. These events are called traumatic experiences. Some common traumatic experiences include being physically attacked, being in a serious accident, being in combat, being sexually assaulted, and being in a fire or a disaster like a hurricane or a tornado.
Mm-hmm.
After traumatic experiences, people can find themselves having problems that they didn't have before the event. If these problems are severe and the survivor does not get help for them, they can begin to cause problems in the survivor's family.
Mm-hmm. Right.
How do traumatic experiences affect people? People who go through traumatic experiences often have symptoms and problems afterwards. How serious the symptoms and problems are depend on many things, including a person's life experiences before the trauma, a person's own natural ability to cope with stress, how serious the trauma was, and what kinds of help and support a person gets from family, friends, and professionals immediately following the trauma.
Mm-hmm.
That gets us back to the services that you are advocating, and you've advocated your whole life,
Right, yeah.
to care for people that have been hurt,
That's right, yeah.
and expanding those
Care people.
services to
Right, yeah.
intervene.
Intervene, yeah, right, yeah.
What do trauma survivors need to know? People who react to traumas are not going crazy. What is happening to them is part of a set of common symptoms and problems that are connected with being in a traumatic situation. Having symptoms after a traumatic event is not a sign of personal weakness. Many psychologically well-adjusted and physically healthy people develop PTSD. Given exposure to a trauma that is bad enough, probably all people would develop PTSD. By understanding trauma symptoms better, a person can become less fearful of them and better able to manage them. By recognizing the effects of trauma and knowing more about symptoms, a person will be better able to decide about getting treatment. So that gets back to the importance of education, and
That's right, yeah.
which up to this point there's been a failure to really educate people about this.
That's right.
So here's some of the common symptoms of trauma, and then we're going to talk about an example of how this would factor into a problem that we're discussing. The problem of conflict in politics. Trauma survivors commonly continue re-experiencing their traumas. Re-experiencing means that the survivor continues to have the same mental, emotional, and physical experiences that occurred during or just after the trauma. This includes thinking about the trauma, seeing images of the event, feeling agitated, and having physical sensations like those that occurred during the trauma. Trauma survivors find themselves feeling and acting as if the trauma is happening again, feeling as if they are in danger, experiencing panic sensations, wanting to escape, getting angry, thinking about attacking or harming someone else. Because they are anxious and physically agitated, they may have trouble sleeping and trouble concentrating. These experiences are not usually voluntary. The survivor usually can't control them or stop them from happening. Mentally re-experiencing the trauma can include anger or aggressive feelings, feeling the need to defend oneself, trouble controlling emotions, because reminders lead to sudden anxiety, anger, or upset.
That's all true. Very much so.
So if people don't understand these, then those symptoms can start to shape all of their interactions with people around them.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And so we're going to read from the World Book Encyclopedia next, and it describes where the fighting between the Republicans and the Democrats may have started. There was a series of traumatic experiences in Congress between, well, in the White House, in the nation's capital, which led to a lot of fighting there, and it seems to have not ended up until the present. So here's some of the things that can happen from traumatic experiences in families. Aggressive behavior towards oneself or others can happen due to frustration over the inability to control PTSD symptoms. It can also happen when other things that happened at the time of the trauma made the person angry. For example, the unfairness of the situation. Some people are aggressive because they grew up with people who lashed out when they were angry and never taught them how to cope with angry feelings. Because angry feelings keep people away, they can stop a person from having a positive connections and getting help. Anger and aggression can cause job problems, marital and relationship problems, and loss of friendships. Problems in relationships with people can happen because people who have been through traumas often have a hard time feeling close to people or trusting people. This may be especially likely to happen when the trauma was caused or worsened by other people, as opposed to accidents or natural disasters. Getting into fights and arguments with people can happen because of the angry, aggressive feelings that are common after a trauma. So this is what seems to have happened in Washington under the administration of Andrew Jackson. Now, this is sort of a in the World Book Encyclopedia here, they talk about this. This is when the split between the Republicans and the Democrats happened. And so this is sort of an unusual explanation, so I hope I won't be like ridiculed for it, but it fits so perfectly that I think it's worth considering. So here it says that Jackson, the son of poor Scottish-Irish immigrants, became an orphan at 14. Jackson's parents, Andrew and Elizabeth Hutchinson Jackson, were a poor farm couple from Northern Ireland. They had sailed to America in 1765 with their first two sons, Hugh and Robert. The elder Jackson built a log cabin and started farming. He died in 1767, a few days before Andrew, their third child, was born. So people that have gone through a lot of traumatic experiences can sort of develop a war mode personality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when they get involved in large groups, then they can sort of throw the whole group into war mode.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think it says, there's a great passage in the Bible in which it says the tongue is a poisoned dart,
mm-hmm.
which can work lots of inequity.
That's right.
Evil?
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. Right,
yep.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Right.
So people that go through a lot of traumas and they don't get treated can mm-hmm. then whip everybody into a frenzy.
Mm-hmm.
So it says, the young Andrew had a quick temper. He grew up among people who were ready to fight at any time to defend their honor. This led him into many fights. Any boy who dared to play a practical joke on Andrew found himself challenged to a battle. A schoolmate later recalled that Andrew would never give up, even when another boy had him on the ground. The Revolutionary War. In 1780, British troops invaded South Carolina. The 13-year-old Andrew and his brother Robert joined South Carolina's mounted militia. Andrew served as an orderly in a battle in which one of his uncles, James Crawford, was wounded. Andrew's brother Hugh had died after an earlier battle. In April 1781, a British raiding party captured Andrew and Robert. The British commander wanted his boots cleaned and ordered Andrew to scrub them. The boy refused, arguing that he had rights as a prisoner of war. The officer lashed out at Andrew with his sword, and the youth threw up his left hand to protect himself. The blade slashed Andrew's hand to the bone and cut him badly on the head. He carried scars from the wounds for the rest of his life. The British officer forced Andrew and Robert to march 40 miles to a military prison at Camden, South Carolina. The brothers caught smallpox there. And in exchange of prisoners, Elizabeth Jackson obtained the freedom of her sons. But Robert soon died of smallpox. Mrs. Jackson died a short time later, and Andrew became an orphan at age 14. Quote, I felt utterly alone, he later recalled. So this is his early life.
Mm-hmm. Trauma.
Yeah.
Filled with trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And then as I read further, I could see that he became those feelings of frustration and irritability shaped his actions
mm-hmm.
in dealing with the Indians.
Right, yeah.
He became, war,
right,
and
yeah.
he was treated them very unfairly.
Sure.
He got in fights with the other people in Congress,
mm-hmm. and
it seems to have factored into the split between the Republicans and the Democrats.
Mm-hmm. So
I'll tell you what I found here. So here's his later life. In 1788, John McNary, judge of the Cumberland Superior Court, appointed Jackson solicitor or attorney general for the region that now forms Tennessee. On his way to Nashville, Jackson stopped briefly at Jonesboro to take part in a civil suit. He accused the opposing lawyer, Waitstill Avery, of taking illegal fees and challenged him to a duel. The argument ended with both men firing their pistols in the air.
mm-hmm.
Jackson's hair-trigger temper involved him in many duels. He killed a man in only one. His pistol duel in 1806 with Charles Dickinson, a lawyer, ended in Dickinson's death. Jackson suffered a serious wound. Dickinson had accused Jackson of being a worthless scoundrel, a poltroon, and a coward. He also had made insulting remarks about Mrs. Jackson. Okay, so then Jackson in 1824, he decided to run for the presidency.
Mm-hmm.
It says, Jackson's military career had ended. At the age of 54, he was looking forward to the life of a country squire, but politicians began to talk of electing him president. Jackson, now a dignified country gentleman, impressed Washington society. Representative Daniel Webster of Massachusetts commented in 1824 that General Jackson's manners are more presidential than those of any of the candidates. Yet Jackson faced stiff opposition in the election of 1824. Secretary of State John Quincy Adams regarded himself as the logical man to succeed President James Monroe. Representative Henry Clay of Kentucky hoped to be elected by winning the vote of the West. A congressional caucus nominated Secretary of the Treasury William H. Crawford for president. Each of the four candidates headed segments of the same party, the Democratic-Republican Party.
Mm-hmm.
So it was all one party, and then
Yeah.
they were going to... You don't remember that, right? That was before your time. Okay. Jackson proved the popular favorite. He won 99 electoral votes. Adams received 84, and other candidates received 78 votes. But no candidate had a majority, so the election went to the House of Representatives, which voted by states. Clay threw his support to Adams, who won the presidency with the vote of 13 states. 7 states supported Jackson. 5 days later, Adams named Clay to as Secretary of State. The enraged Jackson and his supporters charged that the two men had made a corrupt bargain. Adams denied Jackson's charge, but Jackson never believed him. Nor did Jackson ever forgive Adams or Clay. In the following years, Jackson and his supporters did their best to embarrass Adams. So, similar situation to recently,
Yeah.
in which it was a close race,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and Jackson was ahead, and then everybody worked together, and then he lost.
Right. Yeah.
So then came the election of 1828, 4 years later.
Mm-hmm.
So Jackson was going to try again. The presidential campaign of 1828 was one of the bitterest in American history. It split the Democratic-Republican Party permanently. It was also the first in which all nominations were made by state legislatures and mass meetings instead of by congressional caucuses. Adams sought re-election with Secretary of Treasury Richard Rush as his vice presidential candidate. His supporters came to be known as National Republicans. Adams' opponents nominated Jackson for president. As his running mate, they named John C. Calhoun